Hello and welcome to our series Heritage here at the Arabic Islamic Science Museum at the Sheikh Abdullah Al Salman Cultural Center. We're very happy to host our very own assistant manager of the Arabic Islamic Science Museum, Sayed-Ismail Behbehani. He's going to give a lecture. I'll read you the title. The Heritage and Literature as Motives to Save Endangered Animals in Arabia. And this will be a look into the book Wuhush Al-Qasidah by Sayed-Ismail Behbehani. Culturally significant animals in Arabia have become endangered due to habitat and population loss. This seminar, relating to the book Wuhush Al-Qasidah, will shed light on the prominence and roles that some of those animals played in pre-Islamic Jahili Arabic poetry, demonstrated their important place in Arabic literature. This will in turn hopefully show the cultural significance of saving them from extinction. Related concern regarding the conservation of wildlife and culture will also be presented. This topic is the main subject of the book Wuhush Al-Qasidah, written by the assistant manager of the Arabic and Islamic Science Museum, Sayed-Ismail Behbehani. The lecture will be given in English and there will be an usual Q&A session at the end. Sayed-Ismail Behbehani is currently studying for a PhD at the University of Exeter on the topic of pre-Islamic Arabia. He's also the assistant manager at the Abdullah Al Salman Cultural Center, the Islamic Arabic Science Museum, and he's also had experience as a researcher and librarian at the Kuwait National Library. Sayed-Ismail's publication include two Arabic books. One is Wuhush Al-Qasidah, which is going to be the main topic of today's talk, and the second, which was published in March 2020, is Arabic Islamic Scientists and Their Origin of Species Idea, another very interesting topic. Ismail, the floor is yours. You can start now.
Yes, hello, Dr. Sami, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to explain the idea behind my book Wuhush Al-Qasidah in English. Of course, this same talk I've given before in Arabic, and after Dr. Sami advised, or he gave me the idea that maybe I can give it into English and then we can target a different audience with this same lecture, which runs with the idea or tries to illuminate or summarize the idea of my book Wuhush Al-Qasidah, which can be translated into the beasts of the Ode as in poem. So if I can, yeah. So the basic premise of my book, or the different chapters that make up my book, are articles, each on a different animal in pre-Islamic or Jahili poetry. Jahili is the name used in Arabic literature and writing for the pre-Islamic era. So Jahili poetry is pre-Islamic poetry. And Jahili comes from the English word ignorance, because they were perceived by the Muslims as being the ignorant age or the time of ignorance. But it's not only used negatively, because in the poetry and the pre-Islamic poetry is very highly regarded. Actually, it's regarded as the most esteemed Arab literature, secular Arabic literature, but it's still called Jahili poetry because this name is a tag given to everything related to pre-Islamic Arabia. So the book is made of articles, each centered on a specific animal, highlighting the importance of saving that animal after giving a brief about its role in poetry, in pre-Islamic Jahili poetry. So for each chapter, or article. I call them risala in my book. It's basically essay or article. I look at the role of that animal in Jahili poetry, its significance for heritage, either cultural or literary. In my book, I really look at its significance in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry and nothing else. And then I see the important, I link that to the animal in nowadays, how it's facing challenges in the wild and the importance of conserving that animal. So in this talk, I will take the case of two animals I described in my book, and this will give an idea and sense of what I was trying to do in my book. It will also give an idea and sense of the importance, hopefully, of saving these very precious, culturally significant animals. So the Arabian Oryx is my first chapter. My first chapter looks at the Arabian Oryx. At first, I try to describe it scientifically. So scientifically, and also to clarify which species I'm speaking about and what are its names. So the scientific name of the oryx is, as you can see, Oryx leucoryx. So that's the scientific name of the specific Arabian oryx. There are other oryxes or oryxi, I'm not sure about the plural, that are not found in the Arabian Peninsula or in parts of southern Mesopotamia and Levant. They are different species of oryxes. So I'm only interested in the Arabian one. It used to live all around or in different areas of the Arabian Peninsula and the Syrian desert, with two main distributions, one northern and one southern. It is highly adapted and specifically adapted to living in the arid desert region. So now I described this animal, clarified which animal I mean. In my book, I give a bit more details, and then I jump from that into the poetry to see what role this animal played in the pre-Islamic or Jahili poetry. So sorry, I'm just moving my camera because it's getting in front of the wording. So the classical Arabic poem in pre-Islamic times, but also down towards classical Islamic times, goes through three main parts or sections. And this is important if we want to understand where animals or other any subject we would like to understand where it falls or where it is described in Arabic poetry, we have to understand the structure of that poetry. So the Arabic poetry goes through three structures. The Arabic ode, the long Arabic poem. There are some fragmentary or a couple of verses or 3 or 4 verses. These are short poems. I'm not interested in those as of yet. I'm speaking about the long poem. It goes through three main parts or sections. The first part, the poet is walking in the desert or riding his camel or his mount in the desert, and then he arrives at an encampment, a dwelling where his lost or his long gone or his long forgotten lover used to live. So that's the dwelling of her people, of her family. And this poet starts remembering his beautiful days with that lover, and he reminisces about his youth and how beautiful it was, and how he had all the energy, and how good he was at flirting with the young woman, and sometimes specifically remembering one lady which he fell in love with, and he gets very emotional, and the poet can cry in that section. So that section is called بكاء الأطلال, the crying over the lamentation of the ruins or the ruined dwellings. That's the first part. The second part, the poet takes his mount, and which is usually a she-camel, and then he takes a long journey into the desert. And during that journey, the poet proudly describes his mount, his she-camel. So this is the second part, the rihla, or the travel. There is the third part, al-gharad, which is either the third part is the main section or the main goal of the poem. And in that, the poet either yamdah, praises a king or a leader or a tribal leader or somebody who is very of a high status to the poet, or being proud of it himself and his tribe, his qabila, or lamenting and banishing another person or another tribe or qabila. And there are other also gharabs. Sometimes it's more hikmah. He starts to speak about how someone should conduct his or her life. So these are the main three parts of the pre-Islamic Arabic Qasidah. So in order to understand animals' position and roles in the pre-Islamic Qasidah, you'd have to have an idea of that structure. There are other, as I said, smaller verses or fragmentary verses or shorter poems. They don't necessarily have to follow this three-part ode. So back to the Arabian Oryx. The Arabian Oryx appears mostly in the first two parts, the ruins, and then later on we'll see in the travels. In the ruins, the oryx appears as an animal that dwells in the place of the people of the love interest of the poet. So I said that he travels, he meets, or he sees in the desert the ruins of the dwellings of his lover, and he starts to cry at the loss of people in that ruins. And usually there are animals that took the place of these people. So Al-Muraqqish, one of the pre-Islamic Jahili poets, he sees snub-nosed antelopes occupying the dwellings. And he saw them urging their calves and fawns. So these antelopes, when you say snub-nosed, it's usually the meaning is the oryx. So he saw oryx in the dwellings in the place of the people. So he was a bit moved that nowadays this dwelling has been deserted by my lover, and I don't know where she is or her people, but all I know is that these snub-nosed antelopes are taking the place of the woman and the family. Ubayd ibn al-Abras also laments that the dwelling has become the home of the ostrich and its chicks, and the antelopes with necks like serval jugs tenderly setting on the fawns. So again, Ubayd ibn al-Abras is explaining how fortune has changed in this dwelling, from the livelihood of people and my lover and beautiful young woman in this dwelling. Now the animals, and the animals as even if you realize he's speaking about the maternal side of animals with the younger members of their families taking the place of the woman. And he describes the antelope the way he might have described beautiful women, with necks like silver jugs tenderly setting on the fawns. Labid laments ruins that the seeker finds only the fawns and ostrich chicks within them. So this is the trend where this dwelling has become the dwelling of the animals. And among those animals, very often is the oryx. So the oryx appears in the poetry as part of the animals that took the place of the people in the long deserted ruins of the dwellings of the loved ones. There is a day also when these poets speak about, after speaking about the dwellings, they can speak about the day that they saw their loved ones, their loved woman and her family migrating from that place. So I called it the traveling, the migration. It should have been the migration. So Imru al-Qais remembers that day and describes how upon the camel's hoda or hodaj, it's the little dwelling on the camel where women enter and travel, even family members enter and travel. So he describes the woman on the camel's hoda as gazelles and fawns, draped with scented musk and zanbaq. So again, these women can be described as now directly described as being oryx or gazelles or the fawns of oryx themselves. And then you have this opens the door to the use of the oryx as a way to amateurize the love interests of the poets, and this runs until today. It's very usual in Arabic wording, literature, and even daily usage to describe or to liken a beautiful lady to the oryx or to other kinds of antelope, especially the gazelle. So there are recurring themes. So the elongated neck. Bushr ibn Abi Khazin describes the beautiful as the elongates. Like he describes the beautiful ladies as those with elongated necks, as if they are fawns from between the curtains they glance. So he's also speaking about when the woman glance within the curtains of the hoda or the hodaj. The part where the poet starts to describe the beauty of his love interests also falls within the first part of the Arabic Qasidah or ode. Sometimes the first part is not called the ruin, sometimes it's called amatory or the amatorium. It is where the love interests of the poem or the beautiful woman are the main subject of the poetry. So sometimes it's called the ruin or the ruin dwelling part. Sometimes it's called the amatory part because the poet quickly jumps from the ruins into having this amatorious view of his love interest. So again, the eyes, another theme. Taraf ibn al-Abd, like he describes his love interest as like the kuhl-eyed of the frightened mother of a calf. Again, he means the oryx. So the eyes of his lover is like the kuhl-eyed of this mother oryx who's frightened. The poets love the sight of a frightened oryx or an oryx that is very worried over her young, because they see in it what they would have loved to see in the face of their loved interests. This care for the young, this frightened sense, they liked it in woman. Imru al-Qais also described the eyes of his lover like the beast of Wajra that has offspring. So the eyes of his lover or his love interest is like the beast of Wajra. Wuhush Wajra. Wajra is an area in Arabia, and a lot of the beasts, especially the oryx, that are used in poetry to give a sense of how beautiful the love interests of a poet are linked to this Wajra area. It's a very common theme in Arabic poetry to link an animal to a specific area in the desert. Today, we most likely don't know which area is Wajra, because they like the animals of this specific place in the desert. So we will see also, we might not see today because it's in my book, but also the lions are likened to a specific place. That we will see it with the wolves. The wolf is likened to a specific foresty area, and the body can be likened to an oryx. Tarafa ibn al-Abd describes his beloved as having the waist of a mother oryx. So this is the first part where the oryx appears in poetry we were speaking about, either in the dwelling taking the place of the woman, or as directly likened the woman, used to liken women to them as a site of beauty. So this happens in the first part of the poem, the ruins part. I described that the second part of a poem is usually when the poet rides his she-camel away in the desert and starts to be proud of his mount and start to describe his mount. One of the major and important themes of Arabic poetry is when the poet describes or likens his she-camel to an oryx that is struggling against dogs. So this is a major theme in the appearance of oryx in Arabic poetry. It appears as an element that the poet describes his she-camel as one. So this she-camel is described as an oryx, not any oryx, an oryx that struggles against the wolves sent by human hunters. So in the قصيدة لبيد in the معلقات, so one of the most famous poem in all pre-Islamic history is that of Labid. It is one of the 7 or 10 معلقات, so those were the most cherished poems of pre-Islamic Arabia. So when he's riding his camel, his she-camel, he decides to describe it. And he goes through, I summarized his description into 10 sentences. So this is the story of the struggle of the oryx that Labid likens his she-camel for. So I know it might be a bit complicated if you listen to it, but believe me, it's just an oryx that Labid describes. And then he says, my she-camel is just like this oryx. So first, this oryx is attacked and she is detached from the herd and has lost her calf. So suddenly this oryx is in a, for the lack of a better word, in a mess, because she is attacked. For now, we don't know she's attacked from whom, but it will become clear. She's detached from her herd, so she is extremely frightened, and she has lost her calf. Where is her calf? The wolves have fought over his leftover skin. So this calf is dead. He's been eaten or chopped to pieces. Then night arrives and continuous rain is pouring from a hefty cloud. So this oryx is in a terrible situation this night, losing her herd, losing her calf, and she's wary of the wolves. The oryx opts to enter into a crevice in a distant tree trunk to hide or to use it as a sort of shelter from the rain, from the pouring rain. The next morning, her feet are slippery on the muddy ground. She was fearful for a full 7 days. So she's really been in a tough struggle. As she gave up hope, she picked up the sound of humans. So after 7 days, she gave up hope of finding her calf. Apparently, she had hope of finding it, she or him, and she couldn't find it, and she gave up hope. So when she gave up hope, she heard the sound of humans, and the sound of humans here in this poetry is something to be feared. They sent their hounds onto her, so they sent their dogs, and she turned on one with her spear-like horn. She hit one of the dogs, or she pierced one of the dogs. His name is Kessab. We know that because Labid says that in his poetry, and she scattered his blood, while Suham ran away, the other hound. So after describing the struggle, Labid says, oh, it is like this oryx that the she-camel I journey the desert, tending to my needs with. So a lot of commentators, they have a lot of theories of why the poet felt the need to describe his animal as his mount as a she-camel. Apparently, I believe because the oryx, the struggling oryx, is of such a stamina and power and might that, and she went through so much hardships and she fought through them, that that a poet would like to liken his mount for. Not only Labid used this likening of the she-camel to an oryx. It's a continuous trend in pre-Islamic poetry. So after describing the role of the oryx in poetry, I speak in my book, and that goes with every animal, about the state of the oryx today with regards to its conservation. So the last Arabian oryx was shot in 1972. Overkilling and uncontrolled hunting, especially the four-wheel drive cars, they had a monstrous effect on the number of Arabian oryx in the desert. Lee Talbot, he was an author interested in endangered animals, so he alerted the world in his 1960 book. He spoke about the oryx and how the numbers are extremely dwindling. So when I said the last one shot, I meant in the wild. We will see now that in the added time, we managed to save the oryx. So the Phoenix Zoo had a plan. They collected 3 oryxes caught in Yemen and were given by Sheikh Jabir al-Abdullah Sabah of Kuwait and King Saud oryxes from their private collection, plus an oryx from London Zoo. So in the 1960s and 70s, following on from the Phoenix Zoo plan, the Gulf states linked with them and started to raise oryx populations in centers within those Gulf states. There are now 2 populations of oryx that have freedom of roaming in the desert, which is, I mean, it's such an achievement that everybody involved, we should be very thankful for them, because they could have ignored the issue altogether. But it's really a wonderful tale of saving an endangered species. In 2000, the General Secretariat for the Conservation of the Arabian Oryx was created in Abu Dhabi. The Arabian Oryx became the first animal to move from extinct in the wild category to endangered. And this is such an achievement. It shouldn't be underestimated, and we should use it as motivation in all the other struggles for animals in this region and around the world. So this was the Arabian Oryx. I will also speak, I'll try to do it a bit faster about the Arabian wolf. It's also it's the third chapter in my book. So there are 8 animals. Actually, there are 8 types of animals I speak about in my book, 8 chapters, but some of them include more than one species. So the Arabian wolf is a subspecies to the gray wolf, Canis lupus arabs. It is only found in the Arabian desert. So this is again a very national animal with regards to the Arabs, because it's only found in the Arab, just like the Arabian Oryx, it's not found anywhere else. So it's only found in basically Arabia, which is the Arabian desert, the peninsula, Iraq, and southern Levant. I think also in Sinai, it is found. It is the largest canidae in the region, so it's a family that incorporates all wolves. It's all wolves and I think foxes. It's lean, it's adaptable to desert life. It lives in small groups, and a bit like me, it has an open menu, so it eats anything. It's not very specific about what it likes to eat. And rightly so, because it's hard enough finding food in the desert, so you should have an open menu. So the wolf appears in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry mostly to describe or to liken or as an analogy to evil. So Imru al-Qais blatantly states people in evil are worse than the adamant wolves. So he took the wolves as the high bar and likened humans, evil humans, but they are even worse than the wolves. And we have a lady cries her dead brother in Arabic poetry. She's a poetess. So she says, he is in the valley of Sherian. The wolf howls beside him. So the wolf is also a sign of death. He's not only specifically used as death, he's also a sign. It's also a sign of death. There is also a nomad. This is Al-Jahid in his Kitab al-Hayawan, his book of animals. He gives this anecdote. There is a nomad who raised a pup, a wolf pup. And this wolf pup was fully raised by the nomad, so it didn't get the chance to see any other wolf. And then when he grew up, this wolf, it ate his ewe. So it's the female sheep. So he castigates it. You've eaten my dear ewe, having been raised within us, like within our family. Who has revealed to you that your father was a wolf? So never trust the wolf. This is the motto. This is what you get from this anecdote. It's also used as an analogy for a traitor. So a man tells his wife, he pleads with her not to become a wolverine if people wronged me, eating the flesh of her beloved. So there is this idea that a wolf, a female wolf, eats the flesh of her husband if she found a chance. So it's used in poetry also in that sense. But the wolf is also used in less instances. It's used in more brave contexts. So Tufail al-Ghanawi, stallion, when dashing to raid, is like the wolf of Ghada shrubs. Again, Ghada shrubs are little forest areas. It's a type of shrub that the wolf of Ghada is a recurring phrase in Arabic poetry. They like the wolf that belongs to the Ghada shrub. For no scientific reason, it just took on in the poetry, just like the oryx of Wajra. Al-Khansa, one of the poetesses of pre-Islamic, a very famous poetess, she likened the mounts of her brother and clan. They are wrecking the enemies, scowler-faced like the wolves. So a wolf is used to describe a very brave soldier, Ghazi, with his brothers. There is also a recurring theme where the wolf appears in Arabic poetry, it is the desperate wolf, famished in that he's hungry or thirsty. So I'll take just a small, I'll describe a small tale in the poetry of Elder Muraqish, but this is a recurring theme. Imru al-Qais also has it. So Elder Muraqish is proud to have fed a dusted grey wolf, a desperate one. He fed it out of shame. He gave it a piece of his grill, so not to be called a miser, and the wolf left joyful. So the pre-Islamic poets loved this scene of showing how someone is kareem, he is kind and he is generous, and that even the wolf he would feed it and let it live happy. So maybe a lot can be learned from this little anecdote, I feel, even today, even in our subject of trying to save endangered animals. Okay, so one of the major places where a wolf appears in pre-Islamic poetry is in Lamiyat al-Arab. There is a whole scene, a very, very dramatic scene, where the poet likens himself and his brigade or his group of criminals to a pack of wolves. So just a little introduction of Lamiyat al-Arab. Lamiyat al-Arab is by Al-Shanfara. Al-Shanfara is an outcast. There are a group of poets in pre-Islamic history which are called Sa'alik, or outcast. The English word, I think it's called bandits. Yeah, I think it's bandits. So these are outcast bandits that have been, for one reason or another, expelled from their tribes, so from the basic social structure of pre-Islamic Arabia, and they went into groups and they started raiding and skirmishing and whatnot with the caravans and tribes. So the Lamiyat al-Arab is a ode, it's a poem where Ash-Shanfara proudly describes or gives an apology for his lifestyle. So I will just summarize where the wolf appears in this poem. So Al-Shanfara is speaking to his family. So he tells them there is refuge in this world for the proud. He means, if I am proud enough, I can find a proud life away from your tribe or yourselves. So he felt that he was hard done by within them. So he wants to have a life of his own, a proud life, even if it's very, even if he had to struggle a lot, even if it was below from the standard he would have got with them, but he thinks this is something proud he has done. So he tells them, I've beside you another family. So you were my family, but now I've another family. I have a speedy wolf, a cheetah, and a hyena. He's describing his comrades. So he's liking himself and the comrades to animals of the desert. And then he starts liking himself to a hungry wolf. So he says, I'm like a hungry wolf who lives on meager food. The desert extremes passes him place to place. So it's like the desert is playing with him, and he just needs food. So he just travels all day searching for it. So he's likening the desert to someone casting him from place to place. He awakes starved. He faces the wind and searching for food. Of course, something has been made of this idea that the wolf faces the wind. Why is he facing the wind? Because the wind will bring the smell of a carcass or any other vulnerable animal to his nostrils. So the idea that the early Arab poets saw this in the wolf and described this in their poetry is fascinating. And then he likens his comrades to fearsome wolves. So he called for help, and his call was answered by wolves like him. They are lean, skinny, like the arrow of the gamester, they shiver. So the arrow of the gambler, there was a game of gambling game played in pre-Islamic Arabia where there's a gamester who uses an arrow. I don't know the details of the game, but the arrow within that game, it shivers. So he's liking his lean, skin body to the wolf to this arrow of the gamester. And then there is a terrifying description of this wolf pack. And then they are all electrified in searching for food, like women crying over their husbands. And then they became hopeless, and they consolidated each other's. And then they lamented, and then they returned home without food. And this is a beautiful way of his attitude towards not finding food, is that sabr, or bearing. When lamenting is not conductive, it won't do anything, then bearing is more pleasant. Sabru ajmalu. So it's also, he gives a hikmah towards the end. So the Arabian wolf today, just like I did with the oryx, its habitat is unfortunately unconnected. There is no international action or organization to conserve it. In Saudi Arabia, it is orderly spread. Its numbers are decreasing. The UAE studies its return to reserves in Dubai. The occupation regime in Palestine has been active in its conservation in the Negev desert. Its numbers have risen there. Oman is another success story. Oman is actually, as a country, it has a very good stance on animal conservation, and I would like all Kuwait and all countries in the region to look at the model and attitude of Oman towards conservation, and the strong laws they have towards that. They have enforced stringent rules against the killing of the Arabian wolf. There are still challenges and concerns. The reproduction rate with feral dogs is a concern because their genetic structure will change if they are left to breed freely with feral dogs. Animal herders still see a wolf as an enemy, and they would kill it. And we call on authorities to enforce law and become active and cooperate to save this animal. So these are the two animals I spoke about today. The book has 8 other animal types. These 3 animals you're looking at, the Saudi gazelle, the Arabian ostrich, the Syrian wild ass, unfortunately have completely extinct. They no longer they're no longer here with us, and they're extinct through human negligence and human hunting, unnecessary killing. If I take the Arabian ostrich and Syrian wild ass, do you remember when I spoke about the Arabian oryx being likened to a she-camel in the section where the poet travels with its she-camel? These 2 animals are also likened in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry to the she-camel. So they are immensely important in Arabic literature. Unfortunately, they are no longer there. The ostrich died off in the both of them died off in the early 20th century. We have pictures of the Syrian wild ass because some specimens were taken to Europe in the early 20th century. So I think this picture is from a zoo in Germany. The Arabian ostrich, this is a drawing from a later edition of Al-Jahid's Book of Animals. I don't think we have a picture of the Arabian ostrich. In both cases, Arab countries or countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, have gotten species that are close to them in genetically, because these are subspecies. The Arabian ostrich and the Syrian wild ass are subspecies. So they brought subspecies from Africa and Iran into the reserves to take over their place here. So now, towards the end, I'm going to raise some arguments and topics of the book. I'm going to raise them with you, and then you can ask me a few questions and we can discuss for a little while these topics I raise. So the main argument of the book is the conservation of animals. Someone might ask, and people do ask, they've asked me, why bother conserving animals that have no direct effect on our daily lives? So why should we conserve them? What does it mean saving the Arabian wolf when I can go on with my day just normally, whether it's there or it's not there? So this is a question that is recent. It wasn't raised by our grandparents. So this is a very recent and modern and timely question. And usually there are two forms of answers to this question. There is the ecological scientific one, basically the animal web, and how animals live in balance, and when animals not there, the balance changes, and this affects even humans, affects us negatively. But there is this cultural or humanistic answer, which I try to give in this book. So animals across the world have left a strong impression on our culture and human consciousness and have become part of the human heritage. Hence, saving them from extinction is by itself the saving of our human heritage. We have focused on Jahili poetry because it's the earliest Arabic literary corpus, but you can focus on any other literary or heritage-related corpus or output of any other civilized culture in the world, and then you'll find the animals playing an important role in that. So saving these animals are in a way saving our own human culture. Yeah, so this is the main argument of my book. And I speak also in my book about consequences of human development. So humans have overrun nature in the past 250 years since the Industrial Revolution. So before the Industrial Revolution, or revolutions, actually, you can think of it both ways. Humans lived, they didn't live in harmony. They lived in, they didn't outlive their space in the world. So animals and humans coexisted on the planet. They might have not coexisted in the cities or in the farmlands, but overall, there were human realms within wider natural realms with animals living. Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have outgrown themselves like many folds over. Drastic developments with massive pressure on nature, exponential growth in human population. This is the most scary, one of the most scary trends of the 20th and 21st century is the massive growth in human population. At the end of the day, if there are more humans, you need more, more resources and more natural land. And I mean, there is no two way about it. You will destroy nature by having a big human population. And the human population have become massive recently. There are vast pressures on human natural habitats. And this I just found out a few weeks ago. By weight, 60% of mammals are livestock, 36% are humans, and only 4% are wild. This is truly alarming. It is beyond belief. By the way, this picture is the Nubian ibex. It's also one of the animals I cover in my book. It also lives in southern parts of Arabia, and also in East Africa, there are some numbers. That's why it's called the Nubian ibex. So this is a paragraph from my book, Development or Destruction. So I'm just going to read this paragraph, which I translated into English. So the specter of destruction is haunting our world. the destruction of nature and the different habitats and the animals that have lived alongside us on Earth for all human history. Those animals we engage with and that took their places to become an intrinsic part of our heritage and literature. It is truly sad that this destruction is in many instances done in the name of human development and progress. Yet in other instances, this destruction can also arise due to poor negligence and disregard towards the environment or toward heritage and culture. I also describe this this little logical problem of animals that appear in a naughty way, if you like, in poetry. Why should we save them? So the stripped hyena, which I found the cutest picture for the stripped hyena to answer this question. Hyenas and wolves and snakes, they only appear in very negative contexts, mostly appear in the negative context. So I try to explain that the risk of hyena and wolf death today is very low. That's a beginning. And the scientific reality of animals is different than how we humans picture them. So when we liken a wolf to a traitor, that doesn't mean that a wolf is any more malicious than a gazelle or an ant or a butterfly. It's just how humans have pictured these animals. It's an anthropomorphic idea and fables put onto the animals. They reflect our idea of animals and not how they are according to science. The poets actually use the animals to express their feelings and thoughts using similes and depiction. And the poets knew that. They knew that they were not describing the animals scientifically. They are humanizing the animals. They're using them for their poetry. Like the hyena, which digs open the graves, it's a sign of death. So hyena might dig graves in desperation for food, but using it as a sign of death does not mean that there is any link between hyenas and death. It's just the poets being poets, basically. I also speak about the hunting culture. It's hunting is part of our culture. And my book is trying to save culture through saving the animals. But the argument can arise, why don't you save hunting? Hunting is also part of our culture. So I gave a little history explaining that hunting we used to get our food through hunting. Nowadays, we don't. We have stores and markets to get our food. Even societies in our region, the Middle East, where just 100 years ago they might have still hunted. Today they don't. It's just a sport, a heritage, a sport that is part of our heritage. And I do not call to ban all sorts of hunting. I just call for huge regulation, very much controlled hunting, and it's logical that an animal that is endangered shouldn't be hunted. Full stop. It's basic. I believe it's basic logic, and you don't really have to argue much about that. Especially that today's weaponry and the vehicles we are using are incomparable to the ones being used when hunting was a real part of our culture 500, 600 years ago. Today, there is no balance. It's unsustainable for the animal. So if you want to take a spear and hunt using a spear and hide behind the stones in the desert, maybe you are welcome to do so. But if you want to use a four-wheel drive sport car and using your very efficient guns and short guns, this is not the cultural hunting that is part of our heritage. The reproductive rate cannot sustain. At the end, I like to speak about by the way, this is the Arabian leopard, a very magnificent animal. Its numbers today are next to maybe 200 in between Oman and Yemen. It's probably the #1 priority of Arabian animals needing saving. And then there is the Asiatic lion. The Asiatic lion used to live throughout Europe and the Middle East and India. Why I do like this animal? First of all, it's used to live in Arabia, and the poetry is full of references to the lion. But what interests me is the story of saving this lion in India. So the same subspecies of the lion that lived in Arabia, it's the same one that's the Asiatic or Indian lion today living in India. So its numbers. So bear with me about how this lion was, the story of saving this lion. So its numbers dwindled until it was only found in India. So in the 1940s, I think the last Asiatic lion outside of India was shot dead. It was in Iran, I think. Authorities in the early half 20th century, they brought stringent laws against hunting this animal. But during the transfer of power from the British Imperial India into the modern independent India, the lion was threatened again, because during times of political turmoil, the animals bear the bigger brunt of destruction, because rules are not enforced in that part. So the new regime established the Gir National Park in 1965. It gave a magnificent increase in animals. In 1974, there were 180. Today, it's more than 500. So what do we get from this story? That action, authoritative action, saves species. This is what I tried to give in the last chapter of I have a section in my book about what needs to be done. Action needs to be done from the highest level, and our job is to make this action possible. So this is the image credits. So